Long after the clay dust had settled onto the studio floor and the sunbeams had retreated from the windows, the potter stared at a rough, unshaped block of clay. He'd looked at it for more than an hour, hoping to will his imagination into action. His heart was heavy, and for the first time in years, he felt utterly lost. He was supposed to shape the clay, mold it into a masterpiece, but all he saw was dull, unyielding earth. A sense of purpose had once fueled his every decision. From the time he discovered the magic of pottery in his teens to the moment he opened his own tiny studio downtown. But in recent months, a malaise had descended upon him like a slow moving storm cloud. He couldn't name its origin, nor could he recall the last time he felt that spark of creation dancing at his fingertips. One day bled into another, each creation emerging from his kiln feeling tired, routine, devoid of life. He sighed, stood, and packed up for the day, silently vowing he would try again tomorrow, if only the promise of tomorrow could conjure a spark. The next day his vow was tested. He turned on the lights in his small storefront, located on a side street near the usual bustle of city commerce. His sign read simply, "Clay Visions." The interior was warm and welcoming enough. Narrow wooden shelves lined the walls, filled with vases, bowls, mugs, and decorative curios. A few windows looked out onto the street, letting in shy sunlight through dusty blinds. Mid-morning, when he least expected anyone to be there, the bell above the door jingled. He glanced up from the clay he'd been half-heartedly kneading. Standing in the doorway was a woman in her late 20s or early 30s, wearing a neat white blouse tucked into a pencil skirt. Her hair was twisted into a low mantle bun, and she clutched a leather bag in one hand. She looked around the humble studio, her eyes bright with curiosity. "Hi," she said with a tentative smile. "Are you Lucas?" He nodded. "Yes, that's me. I heard you offer pottery lessons. I found your flyer on a community board." Lucas felt a flicker of something at her mention of lessons, perhaps mild. She considered for a moment, stepped forward, then looked down at her hands. "I work in an office all week, usually well past normal hours. My name's Tessa, by the way. I don't really have a lot of spare time, much less energy, but I really want to find some creative release." She blushed, as though the admission felt too personal. Lucas rested his wrists on the edge of the pottery wheel. "If weekends are your only option, there's room in my Sunday workshop. It's from 9 to 11 in the morning." She hesitated. A flicker of doubt crossed her eyes. "That's perfect. However, I'm always so worn out by the end of the work week I almost canceled, you know. But I realized I need something for myself." Her sincerity and the earnestness in her expression touched something. It wasn't the usual passing interest he encountered in casual browsing. She seemed quietly determined, despite that subtle exhaustion. He tried not to betray too much emotion. "All right, I'll pencil you in if you somehow find a free hour or two in the evenings. I'm usually here. My studio is open after normal working hours, so I'm available." She gave him a grateful smile. "I might do that. Honestly, I never know if I'll get stuck at the office, but I'll keep that in mind." Lucas handed her a small paper brochure typed up in basic black and white text, detailing the costs and what basic supplies were included. She studied it, nodding, and soon they settled the shore details for Sunday's class. That Sunday, Tessa arrived promptly at 9. 3 other students were already there, all women in colorful aprons. Tessa wore a plain apron over her casual clothing. She sized up the 6 potter's wheels arranged in a semicircle and settled on the one closest to the window. Lucas was slightly startled by the gentle excitement that bloomed in his chest upon seeing her. Her hair was pulled into a ponytail, with a few unruly strands framing her face. The tension that had been visible earlier in the week seemed to have eased a bit. He introduced himself to the group and gave a short overview of what they'd be doing. "We'll start with the basics. We're shaping small bowls or cups. Later, we'll move on to more advanced pieces." He demonstrated the technique, hands steady around the spinning clay, explaining posture and arm position. When it was the students' turn, Tessa listened inside her own bubble of focus. Through repeated attempts, her first clay form wobbled, threatened to break apart, yet she kept trying. Lucas was impressed by her perseverance. She didn't get frustrated by mistakes. Instead, she seemed almost delighted by them, as though acknowledging a challenge she couldn't wait to conquer. By the end of the 2-hour lesson, Tessa had worked through 3 lumps of clay with only one lopsided bowl to show for her troubles. Still, her grin was radiant. That was more fun than I've had in ages, she confessed to Lucas when the others had stepped away to wash up. The clay feels so alive, like it breathes with me. A small ember glowed in Lucas's chest. It is alive in a way. You can't force it. You have to guide it gently and listen to how it responds to your touch. Tessa's eyes shone. I'd like to do that. Her voice carried something like a promise, perhaps to herself, perhaps to him. A few days later, she showed up unannounced in the early evening. Lucas was half-heartedly turning a vase on the wheel when he heard the bell ring. He glanced up, meeting her gaze. She looked exhausted, yet determined. I'm sorry to just barge in, she said, but you said I could come if I had extra time. It's after 6, and I'm done for the day, believe it or not. Lucas nodded and turned off his wheel. He changed out the clay for a fresh batch, offering her a seat at a second wheel. She thanked him softly. For the next hour, they worked in near silence, the only sounds being the low hum of the wheels and the gentle splatter of water against clay. After jostling a pot into a recognizable shape, Tessa let out a short laugh. It's so calming to be here. My cubicle is about as calm as a wasp nest, and I'm the wasp. Lucas chuckled. I can imagine. Well, as long as you find it relaxing, that's all that matters. Pottery is a good antidote to the stress of daily life. He noticed Tessa's eyes flick once around the studio, landing on the various works he'd displayed. She let out a small sigh. It's hard to remember what it felt like to have time for something fun. Before this, the only creative outlet I had was doodling in the margins of meeting notes. Now I get to shape the clay. You seem to have a knack for it, Lucas told her, a genuine smile touching his lip. Even if your bowl is slightly misshapen, you've got a natural feel. A faint blush colored her cheeks. Thanks, that means a lot. Their moment was punctuated by a sudden ring from Tessa's phone. She glanced at it, appeared conflicted for a heartbeat, then tapped to dismiss the call. Sorry if I'm interrupting something, Lucas asked gently. She shook her head but didn't answer. Instead, she steadied her clay and continued working, remaining clipped and focused. Lucas didn't press her, sensing that she needed the quiet space. After she left that evening, he realized the studio didn't feel so empty anymore. He wondered if teaching Tessa was pulling him out of his slump. Her newness, her curiosity, and her eagerness reminded him of the excitement he used to feel when he discovered a new form or glaze technique. Watching her eyes widen when he demonstrated a new skill gave him a simmer of pride, a hint of recollection of why he loved this craft in the first place. Over the following weeks, Tessa popped in irregularly. Sometimes she arrived at the official group class on Sunday. Other times she found a spare hour on a weekday evening. With each appearance, their conversations edged from strictly pottery to more personal details. Tessa confessed that she was drowning in deadlines at her finance job. The environment was stifling, the corporate ladder never ending. She had no idea if she was climbing or merely clinging to each rung. Lucas, in turn, shared that he'd once hoped to expand his studio or perhaps open a collaborative workspace with other artists. But the costs were too high, and the competition for gallery space was fierce. He found himself short of ideas and even shorter on passion. Some days I feel I'm just going through the motions, he admitted one afternoon. But you're so talented, she replied softly. When you're at the wheel, it's like watching magic. He smiled, running a hand over the half-finished piece he'd been working on. Thank you, but lately the magic feels fleeting. Sometimes they'd linger even after the lesson. One crisp autumn evening, as she was about to leave, Tessa paused at the door. The twinkle of street lamps illuminated her face. I'm organizing a small get together next weekend. Actually, my coworkers insisted on it, some kind of team building thing. We're meeting at a cafe. Would you like to join us? Lucas blinked. Me? He'd never considered stepping outside the boundaries of instructor student with Tessa, but her invitation sent a flutter through his chest. She shrugged, still holding the door open. If you have time. I know it might not be your scene, but I'd love for you to meet the people I talk about, and maybe it'll give you some fresh perspective. We can talk about something other than clay for a change. He hesitated. I'm not usually great in group settings, especially if they're all your coworkers. But he inhaled deeply. Sure, I'll come, if that's okay. Her smile lit up the doorway. Great, I'll text you the details. That brief encounter took on a life of its own in his imagination over the ensuing days. He wasn't sure whether this was just a friendly invitation or something more personal lurking under the casual veneer. He tried not to overthink it, but Tessa's bright eyes and earnest smile popped into his mind unexpectedly. For the first time in months, he felt a dash of excitement for something outside of his pottery wheel. On the designated evening, he arrived at the cafe, scanning for Tessa or any group that appeared to be from a finance office. He spotted her at a table with three others, all chatting animatedly over coffee and pastries. Tessa waved him over. Lucas, you made it! Everyone, this is the Potter I told you about. He met Tessa's colleagues, two men and a woman. They were friendly in that corporate sort of way, but one of the men was more subdued, politely shaking hands and thanking Lucas for keeping Tessa sane after hours. Conversation bounced around from office horror stories to favorite TV shows. Lucas interjected where he could, though mostly his role was an observer. Tessa, sensing his occasional unease, would glance at him with a reassuring nod or place her fingers lightly on his forearm. Each time she did, a tremor of warmth threaded through him. When the gathering ended, Tessa and Lucas lingered outside under a string of outdoor cafe lights. Thanks for coming, she said, stuffing her hands in her coat pockets. My coworkers can be a bit much sometimes. They were all right, Lucas replied, slipping his own hands into his jacket. It was good meeting them. I think I see a bit of why you need an escape. They're nice, but I can tell the environment is intense. Yeah, intense is a good word. She let out a small sigh, then turned her face toward him. I really appreciate your willingness to teach me. It might sound silly, but learning pottery has kept me from burning out completely. Lucas let his eyes rest on hers for a moment. There was something unspoken there, a silent understanding about forging a path toward hope. You know, he said quietly, teaching you has kept me going too. I haven't felt the creative spark for a while, but your energy, it's kind of rekindling something. She smiled. It's a two-way street then, huh? Their gaze lingered. A moment of closeness charged the air, the swirl of late-night traffic humming several feet away. They didn't speak of it, nor act on it, but something pulsed between them, gentle and promising. At the studio the following week, Tessa arrived breathless, having run from the bus stop. She'd taken off her jacket and set her purse down when Lucas noticed how her shoulders trembled slightly as she tried to catch her breath. You okay? He asked, stepping closer. She regarded him with weary eyes. I just had a meltdown at the office, she admitted in a hush. I yelled at my boss. I never do that. We've been working 80-hour weeks, the pressure's insane, and he said something that set me off. She shook her head. I said I needed a break. Now, I'm pretty sure I'm on his blacklist. Lucas looked at her uncertainly. Maybe you needed to get that out. Sometimes you have to speak up for yourself if it's hurting you. Tessa swallowed hard, her eyes brimming with some unspoken emotion. Yeah, but I can't afford to lose that job, not right now. He guided her gently to a stool by the long work table, then placed a piece of clay in front of her. Let's work it out, he said, voice low. That's what clay is for. She nodded silently and pressed the clay with trembling hands. For several minutes, they didn't speak, the tension easing from her body as she pounded and kneaded. shaping something from her stress. Lucas gave her space, merely observing. Finally, her breathing slowed. She closed her eyes for a moment, seemed to center herself, then opened them to peer at him across the table. "Thank you," she whispered. "I don't think I could have found that calm place alone." Feeling an unexpected tenderness, Lucas offered a soft smile. She returned it. They both knew a line had been crossed, though not in a bad way. They were no longer just an eager student and a tired potter. Something deeper was forming, a bond that supported and inspired. Days slid into weeks, leaves on the trees outside the studio drifting toward shades of gold and red. Tessa's presence in the studio became a welcome constant in Lucas's routine. His once dormant imagination stirred more frequently. He began experimenting with new glaze colors, surprising even himself with half-finished ideas that he actually wanted to see through to the end. Tessa took note of his renewed energy. "I can feel you coming back to life," she teased one morning as they sponge slip onto a piece. One dark evening, after the store had closed, they slumped down side by side on a battered old couch in the back of the studio. She'd brought takeout, and the aroma of noodles and vegetables hung in the air. The place was quiet except for a soft jazz tune Lucas had put on in the background. They talked about random things, favorite childhood memories, the time Tessa snuck into a neighbor's backyard to pick flowers because she wanted to surprise her mother, the day Lucas discovered how to center clay for that perfect symmetrical shape. The conversation felt effortless, weaving them closer. At some point, their shoulders brushed as they laughed. They both paused, glancing at each other. Tessa's gaze flicked down to where his hand rested on his lap. Carefully, she placed her fingers over his. Her touch was warm and a wild flutter ignited in his chest. She let out a small breath as if testing the moment for sincerity. Lucas turned his palm to cradle her hand, his thumb gently stroking her skin. For a while, they sat in that hush, leaning on each other, the faint notes of jazz weaving through the silence. Then Tessa lifted her head, her expression thoughtful. "I'm not sure what this is, Lucas," she admitted softly. "I'm probably a mess. My job is suffocating, and you're just recovering from a block that's been haunting you for months. It's probably not exactly the best timing." Lucas turned, gently brushing a stray hair from her face. "It might not be the best timing," he agreed. "But it feels right." She let out a half laugh, half sigh. "It does." He leaned forward, and their lips met in a tentative kiss that tasted like warmth and possibility. Tessa's shoulders relaxed, and Lucas felt an exhilarating lightness surge through him, a recognition that within the swirling chaos they each faced, they had found something real. Their romance was cautious in the days that followed, each balancing the demands of their separate worlds. She was embroiled in a make-or-break project at her office, yet she still managed to come by the studio once or twice a week, if only for an hour. Lucas found himself shaping more daring sculptures, leading him to believe that the dryness that had plagued him was finally receding. One afternoon, after a quiet session in the studio, Tessa sighed and turned to him. "I've decided I need to talk to my boss about taking a little break. Maybe not an official leave, but cutting back. My health, that's on the line, and I want to be here more often." He glanced at her. "Are you sure that's wise?" She nodded, fingering a newly created mug, not yet fired in the kiln. "I can't let fear hold me back. I can't let that job break me. Pottery has shown me I'm capable of shaping my own life, you know." Lucas felt a surge of admiration. "I think that's brave. I support you. The door to this studio is always open for you." He paused. "And so is my heart, if that means anything." She gazed up at him, her eyes misty. "It means everything." Later that week, the piece Lucas had been working on, a large ornate vase layered with swirling patterns, filleted with shape. He decided on a golden glaze with hints of lavender for accent. With trembling anticipation, he placed it in the kiln, realizing it was his first big piece in months where he felt genuine pride. He'd poured so much newly awakened passion into it, and there was no denying that Tessa's presence had been the catalyst. When the piece finished firing, it emerged from the kiln glowing and ethereal, gleaming under the studio lights. The patterns were precisely how he'd envisioned them, lines flowing like gentle waves. Tessa happened to be there that day. As soon as she saw it, her eyes widened with delight. "Lucas, that's exquisite," she gushed, gently touching the cooled surface. "It's like a dream captured in clay." Her excitement lit his heart. "I'm calling it Dawn's Renewal," he said, surprising himself with the elegance of the name. She kissed him on the cheek. "Perfect name." With Tessa's encouragement, Lucas decided to submit it to a local artist exhibit, a monthly showcase that displayed new works from emerging and established artists in the community. It was a step he hadn't dared to take in a long time. He'd given up on exhibits when his inspiration dried up, but now he felt ready to share again. Tessa attended the opening with him, standing proudly by his side as visitors wandered the gallery, pausing to marvel at Dawn's renewal. On the night of the showcase, Tessa arrived straight from work, wearing a pencil skirt paired with a thoughtful, summery blouse that brightened her look. Lucas offered her a relieved smile. He wore simple slacks and a button-down shirt, feeling slightly out of place among the more bohemian crowd. But Tessa looped her arm around his, whispering, "You all right?" He nodded, nervous, but excited. They wandered the gallery, glimpsing other artists' sculptures, paintings, and photographs. Eventually, they returned to stand by his vase. Tessa spotted a slender older woman in a chic black dress examining it. The woman took her time, leaning in, then called an associate over. Lucas watched, his pulse jumping. "They look like someone important," Tessa murmured under her breath. The older woman walked up and introduced herself as one of the curators of a well-known local gallery. She complimented Lucas on his piece. "There's an organic flow in the patterns, very reminiscent of new beginnings," she noted with a keen eye for detail. "We'd love to discuss having you in a future group show. Here's my card." Lucas was speechless for a moment, caught between surprise and elation. Tessa squeezed his hand, her cheeks glowing with pride. He cleared his throat enough to respond. "I thank you. I'd be honored." With the curator gone, Tessa beamed at him. "You did it. Your work is incredible. I'm so proud of you." Feeling uncharacteristically bold, Lucas slipped an arm around her waist. She leaned in, letting their foreheads rest together briefly, ignoring the strangers milling about. "You're part of this," he whispered. "You showed me I still had dreams to shape." Her eyes glistened. "I'm going to shape my own dreams too, you know. It's scary, but I want to. I feel so, I don't know, light. Maybe it's from seeing you succeed, or from the pottery lessons. But something has shifted, and I can't go back to how I was before." Under the soft lights of the gallery, they kissed quietly, a warm promise sealed between them. At that moment, the noise and bustle receded, and in their shared breath, hope took root for something bigger than either had envisioned when Tessa first walked into the studio. In the weeks that followed the showcase, Tessa began to seriously reevaluate her work situation. She decided to propose a reduced schedule or partial remote work arrangement to her manager. The night before her meeting, she was a bundle of nerves, pacing in the studio's back room while Lucas calmly shaped a cup on the wheel. After a series of breathless monologues about her boss, the company, and the negative culture, she paused, closed her eyes, inhaled the comforting scent of clay and glaze, and let her shoulders relax. "Can I try?" she asked, motioning to the spinning clay in front of Lucas. He nodded, sliding aside. "Of course. When you center yourself on the wheel, everything else disappears." She settled in, placed her hands firmly on the blob of wet clay. He guided her wrists, reminding her how to keep them steady. "Feel it," he said in a low, steady tone. "Breathe and let the clay guide you. Don't force the shape." The wheel spun around, shaping a tall cylinder under her careful pressure. Before long, she was lost in the gentle, methodic motion, the stress in her body easing with each turn. Lucas watched as she molded the sides, gathering the clay inward. When she finally stopped, she lifted her clay-stained hands and exhaled. A small, elegantly fluted vase stood on the wheel, slightly uneven but beautiful nonetheless. That's lovely," Lucas said softly. Tessa ran a finger along the rim, beaming. "I feel better now," she confessed. "I might be terrified for tomorrow, but I have this and I have you." He helped her stand, and they embraced, ignoring the smears of clay that got onto their clothes. In that silent moment, he pressed his lips to her temple. She smiled into his shoulder, letting the worries recede. The next day, Tessa confronted her boss. It wasn't a smooth conversation. Her boss bristled at the idea of her cutting back hours, but Tessa found a new resolve, a calm rooted in the knowledge that life was more than constant deadlines. She told him that if it wasn't possible to compromise, she'd have to consider other options. Her boss hemmed and hawed, eventually granting her a trial period of shortened hours. The team was too dependent on her expertise to risk losing her entirely. She relayed the news that evening, practically bounding into the studio, her hair a bit messy from the day's tension. Lucas leaned forward, arms wide, and she nearly jumped into them. "I did it," she breathed. "I'm going to have my nights back. I'm going to live." He lifted her off her feet in relief, spinning her slightly. They both laughed. She pressed her forehead against his, breathless. "It's not perfect yet, but it's a start. It's all you need," Lucas replied, setting her down gently. "Now we can shape more than just clay. We can shape the life we want." Together they cleared a patch on the work table and spread out Tessa's newly purchased stencils and carving tools. They'd decided to add carved designs to the sides of her fluted vase. With her shortened hours, Tessa could visit the studio more regularly and build on her growing skills. Meanwhile, Lucas, buoyed by the positive reception at the exhibit, looked into new ways to market his work and even started drafting a plan for the collaborative workspace he'd once dreamed about. Time passed in small, sweet increments. Their relationship blossomed through each shared meal of takeout, each quiet talk about life's pressures, and every gentle hour spent molding clay, side by side. The fledgling spark that began with Tessa's timid introduction and Lucas's weary emptiness had grown into a steady flame, illuminating the path forward. Pottery wasn't merely pottery anymore. It was a symbol of renewal, proof that something can be shaped and reshaped, refined through fire, and emerge stronger, more beautiful. One evening, after tidying the studio, Tessa and Lucas took a stroll through the nearly empty streets. Autumn leaves crunched beneath their feet. "I was thinking," Lucas said, "there's a place downtown that rents studio space to artisans at a decent cost. It's bigger than here, with room for multiple instructors. I want to see if it might be viable." Tessa slipped her hand into his, her heart skipping a beat at his expression of excitement. "I love that idea. I'll help you however I can." He raised their joined hands to his lips and kissed her knuckles. "Thank you." They wandered beneath streetlights, their shadows lengthening on the sidewalk. The future felt hopeful. Each day, Tessa felt more certain that her corporate job wouldn't be her forever path, though for now, the compromise helped lighten her load. Lucas, for the first time in ages, could see the shape of his own aspirations, stretching before him like wet clay on a wheel, waiting to be molded by his renewed passion. They paused on a small bridge overlooking a narrow river that ran through the heart of the city. Moonlight reflected on the gentle ripples below. Tessa turned into his arms, inhaling the crisp night air. "Sometimes I can't believe how quickly everything changed," she mused. "Just a couple of months ago, I was stifled in my desk job, burying myself in spreadsheets and deadlines. And you were feeling stuck, losing faith in your own creativity?" He brushed a stray leaf from her hair. "I still have days where the block looms, But then I remember how it felt to watch you take that clay in your hands for the first time, so full of wonder. It reminds me that the spark is still there. Maybe it was just waiting for the right moment or the right person to reignite it. She smiled, caressing his cheek gently. Even if we can't fully predict where this goes, I'm glad it's happening. You've shown me that I can shape my own world, not just crank out numbers for someone else. They kissed tenderly on that bridge, the city lights shining like 1,000 scattered dreams in the distance. The steady hush of the water lent the scene a sense of timelessness, as though their story was just beginning, with infinite chapters yet waiting to be sculpted. When they finally let the moment pass, continuing hand in hand along the dim sidewalk, they carried with them a promise to keep shaping and reshaping their lives, to navigate the distractions and challenges of work, and to celebrate each triumph, no matter how small. Because, much like a pot on the wheel, what began as a formless lump of clay could become a work of art, spinning hope into reality under steady hands and the warm, guiding light of love.